Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. I'm TCaptainX. Today we're going to be talking about the close range meta in Warzone Season 5 and basically discussing what are the best SMGs, and we'll also talk a little bit about what are the best sniper supports. The first half of this video, I'm going to be explaining the different strengths and weaknesses of each gun and sort of ranking them from a statistical perspective and also a little bit of a subjective perspective as well. And all of my information for this, for the stat stuff, is coming from TrueGameData.com, so big shout out to TGD. I also want to say at the beginning of this that the close range meta is in a pretty good spot right now. There's a lot of good options to use, and there's not like a clear-cut best gun. So that's why it's important for you guys to watch and understand this part. That way you know what's best for you depending on your playstyle and what game modes you play as well. So to make this part as easy as possible for you guys to understand, I've made this Excel sheet and I've ranked all the different guns here with different categories, and I've color-coded it so you can see nice and easy and kind of understand what's going on. I do have the guns on the left here ranked in a kind of rough order of how I rank them. So the ISO 45 being my top one, Chimera being towards the bottom. I did leave out a few SMGs that I just feel like are not worth using really at all. So like MX9, Fennec, and Minibach, I don't even have in here ranked because there's really no point in using them because there's others that just do everything better than them. So one of the most important stats is of course TTK, or time to kill. And I did break this apart into close range, mid range, and long range here. Now close range is generally the most important because this is our close range gun, and you're going to see how there's a pretty direct correlation to close range TTK of how these guns are ranked overall. Mid range is still super important and super underrated, and that's where guns like the Vel really shine. And then long range is not going to be nearly as important unless you're running it as a sniper support, because then you're going to be using that gun a lot in these 15 to 30 meter range fights. And you'll see that the assault rifles do a lot better in these mid to long range areas, but they struggle in other areas. So let's jump over to TrueGameData.com and very briefly kind of break down the time to kill differences of some of these. So number one, this is combined time to kill, which is an average of all the different body parts. That's like including mixing in limb shots, headshots, things like that. Now you'll see here it is very close among these top four SMGs. The Lachmann Sub and ISO have nearly identical close range time to kills at about 600 milliseconds. Vaznev is just barely behind at 616 milliseconds, and then the Vel comes in fourth at 630 milliseconds. However, this is combination TTK. If we change it to chest time to kill, that Vel in the red line does drop back, and the reason for that is the Vel, you have to hit at least one headshot to drop that time to kill down to that 630. So keep that in mind with the Vel. If you're going to use it and you want to get those better TTKs, you got to have kind of a little bit better aim and be able to work chest and then hit in a headshot or two to get that better TTK. Now the Vel's strength though is its mid-range area, because from about 8 to 13 meters it has the fastest killing time to kill in pretty much the whole game, and I've definitely amongst all SMGs. Now the ISO though is phenomenal as well there. It's very, very good, and at long range up to about, you know, that 30 meter range, which is kind of like the viable area of where you're going to use one of these SMGs, the ISO is on top there. However, we'll talk about this a little bit later. The ISO probably has the most recoil of these SMGs, which can make it harder to use in those areas. Now briefly, the FSS Hurricane is not great in the time to kill department, but not horrible either. It's actually pretty good long range, so another very viable sniper support. PDSW, very, very good mid-range in the white line here, so definitely a very possible sniper support, although it has a lot of recoil as well. Kastov 70 for you, and I'll add the rest of the AR, so Chimera and Green, and now the Tempus Razorback. They all struggle close range, but mid to long range are all very, very good. So those are the guns that you're going to want to use more as a sniper support, or especially on Al Mazrah as a sniper support. So now let's kind of talk about some of the rest of the stats, because these are still very, very important. So next, damage per mag. This is the ISO's kind of main weakness, is it has a little bit smaller damage per mag, which is how much damage you can do before you have to reload the gun. So if you play trios or quads, this is a much more important stat to consider for your close range gun. However, the ISO does have a very, very fast reload time, one of the fastest reload times, so that does kind of negate that stat just a little bit. Vel's very good with the 60 round mag. Lachmann Sub, this depends whether you run the 40 or the 50. With the 40 you have a lot better movement speeds though, so if you run the 50, these movement speeds are a little bit slower. Now the Hurricane, that's a very underrated stat about it, has great damage per mag, and it also has some other great mobility things, but remember the Hurricane's time to kill is kind of meh. It's kind of the one thing that holds that gun back. Now when it comes to movement speeds, a lot of these are pretty similar overall, but the PDSW, the P90, actually has some phenomenal movement speeds, and so that does make that gun a lot of fun to run. The aim down sight speed times of these guns are also pretty similar, except for the assault rifles. Those are going to be a bit slower, and the PDSW does have a pretty slow ADS as well. despite it having a very fast sprint to fire. Overall, the Vel does have the fastest, but the differences between these are pretty small, so it's not something you want to focus on too much between these. Now, sprint to fire time, this is very important if you're a very aggressive player. If you like to run around constantly, because sprint to fire is, of course, the time it takes from when you're sprinting with your gun up in the air to bring that gun down and then start to aim it. That is sprint to fire time. Lachmann Sub does struggle just a little bit in this, and that's because it lacks the rear grip attachment that you can make it faster. It doesn't have an attachment that makes it faster like all the other guns do. PDSW actually has a crazy fast sprint to fire time, so you can be very aggressive with that gun because that kind of counters that slower ADS. And then the assault rifles really struggle overall in the sprint to fire department compared to the SMGs. So if you're gonna run this as your close range or as like your sniper support, very important to not be just running around corners blindly. You need to come in slow and not be sprinting around those corners. Now, strafe speeds or ADS movement speeds, this is when you're aiming the gun, how fast you can walk side to side while aiming. This is one of my favorite stats about SMGs, and I think one of the most underrated stats. The ISO and Vaznev and Hurricane have some of the best strafe speeds, and this makes you a much harder target to hit when you're shooting and moving. Also, if you are a controller player, you're going to get more rotational aim assist when you are strafing and aiming. So very, very important stat. I absolutely love this about the ISO, and it's one of the main reasons why I have the ISO ranked so high. Now, recoil isn't as important for close range guns because most of the time we're using these guns in close range. We don't need to have super low recoil on these. So the ISO and Vel do have not the best recoil, but again, it's not awful because we're not using these at super long range unless we're going to build it as a sniper support. PDSW definitely has the worst recoil of these, assuming you build it kind of like how I do, and we'll of course show the builds here in a moment. The other ones are all pretty similar overall though. Now, I did make an average score for these, and these are, you'll see that the ISO did rank the highest, but this is like an unweighted thing, so don't go fully off of that whole average score thing. So now let's get to the loadout part of the video where I explain the loadouts. I will try to kind of give my reasoning on why I build guns the way I do, and a lot of these builds I did get courtesy of TrueGameData.com. So again, shout out to TGG for his MetaGen finder. The numbers on the screen, those are going to be the tuning stats. That way you can just take one nice screenshot. So as far as SMGs go, if I'm running an ammunition slot, I am pretty much always running hollow point now. The reason for that is hollow point causes this crippling power, and what it does is if you shoot someone in the lower half of the body, basically the leg area, it causes this very visual stun effect where your screen is all kind of like whited out and stunned, and you also can't sprint, and it is very annoying to get shot by someone using this. So I love using this, and I use it on pretty much all my SMGs now. Now, one thing I do want to talk about is I want to explain how I tune guns. I get asked this constantly, so let me briefly explain this. So I don't really care about bullet velocity in SMG because we're using this at close range, so I'd rather have good recoil. So let's bring this all the way back to 0 here, and what I want you guys to do is I want you to watch the recoil line right here. As I start to drag it, you'll see that line gets bigger, but as I go all the way, watch the range here out here. Watch how the range actually gets smaller at the end. However, if I back up to about, it's like right about here around -5, this is going to be the peak where the recoil is at its greatest area and also the range is at its greatest area. However, with damage range, for example, it just keeps getting better. There's no reason for me to actually, I take that back actually. When I go back, I actually think right about there is actually better. And the reason that was some of these stats down low actually got bigger as I dragged it down. So basically just go nice and slow and try to find the peak of all of these lines. So for the rest of the build, definitely want to run that 45 round drum as the ISO doesn't have a very small, or doesn't have a big magazine and it shoots very fast. The EXP shear rear grip, this is the one that helps our sprint to fire and aim down sight speed time. I usually always run the rear grip on my SMGs. That helps with that because that's a very important stat for a close range gun, so you can sprint and get your gun ready to shoot here quickly. Demo fade tack stock, this is the one that's going to help our sprinting speed and also help our strafing speed, which again, that overall mobility, very important on an SMG. Now the ISO is one of the few SMGs I definitely always run in Opticon because the iron sights are not very good. If you don't mind the iron sights, I'd probably say run a laser for, again, a little bit faster ADS, or run a horizontal compensator muzzle to smooth out that recoil. Now, one thing I will explain when it comes to lasers and how I pick them. Normally, I am running the laser that only helps aim down sight speed and has no con. And the reason for that is this one is not visible, so I can pre-aim the gun and I don't have to worry about my enemies seeing the laser. The VLK laser is visible in aim down sight speed. It does help more, especially with sprint to fire, but I really like to pre-aim a lot and try to like strafe and aim around corners, and I don't want my enemies seeing that and giving away my position.
We've located the rest of them.
So moving on to the Vel 46, aka the MP7 here. I do like to go with a 60 round mag on this one. There is a 50 round mag, but the difference in penalties is pretty small when it comes to this, and I'd prefer to have those extra 10 rounds, especially if I'm playing trios or quads. Again, going with that hollow point ammo here. Another thing that's nice about when you run ammo, if you tune it towards damage range, you're going to actually get a little bit more range out of the gun. So on those TTK charts we showed earlier, the ranges are actually gonna be a little bit better because we can tune it for damage range. The Schlager Soldier Grip, again, that's the one that helps with sprint to fire and aim down sight speed time. Demo RXD stock, pretty much the same thing as the ISO stock, where it's gonna help our sprinting speed, strafe speed, stuff like that. And then lastly, the iron sights are fine on the Vel, so I do run that 1 milliwatt quickfire laser. Again, that's the one that is not visible. Now, if this gun has too much recoil for you, I'd suggest take either the laser or the stock off and then put, again, a horizontal compensator on. So go to something like the FTAC Castle Comp, the Lacerda compensator, really any of these compensators. And if you don't have any of these special ones unlocked, you can use others, but these are the ones that are going to help the most overall with recoil.
Find cover. Enemy dropped.
So moving on to the Lachmann Sub, aka the MP5. If your goal is just good movement speeds and fast TTK, this is what you want to use here. I do normally go with the 40 round mag on the Lachmann because it does have a lot faster reload time compared to the 50, but just know you're not going to have as much damage per mag. You got to kind of be careful about how you play with that. Again, hollow point ammo. Now, again, like I said earlier, the MP5 is one of the few SMGs that it does not have a rear grip that can speed up your aim down sight speed or sprint to fire. So I do go with the one that helps with recoil control, but because I'm doing that, I do run the VLK laser on my MP5. This is the one that is visible, but it speeds up our sprint to fire time. And that is kind of to counteract that. So I just have to remember my laser is visible. I can't pre-aim everything when I'm running this gun. And then lastly, the L38 Falcon barrel. This helps boost our movement speed. And I really like that out of this MP5 because that's kind of its main strength overall. Now, some people do take the hollow point off and they like to run the mirror recoil factory stock. And that is because it speeds up your sprinting speed and actually helps your recoil control a little bit. So that is another very good option, but overall, I think the hollow point is better.
He's so bad.
850.
Okay.
What just happened?
Dude, I almost killed him too. Okay.
Oh, that was Cap. Cap, I'm sorry, I love you.
Oh, did you
Ripper.
Cap? No way.
Moving on to the Vaznev, which is actually one of my personal favorites just because it has like a good feel-good factor. It's got really good strafe speeds, super easy to use, low recoil. I really love the Vaznev personally, and I'm surprised not as many people use it. Hollow point again, 45 round mag. True Tac grip is going to be the one that speeds up the aim down sight to sprint to fire. Ultra that stock, same thing, really helps that strafing speed a ton. And then the Schlager Peck box is just like that 1 milliwatt. This is the one that's going to speed up our ADS, but not be visible. Now, one thing I have been experimenting with the Vaznev is that I've actually been taking off the laser and putting on a red dot. You can put on whatever you want, Chrono Mini Pro, Slimline, whatever you want. And the reason for that is the iron sights are fine on the Vaznev, but there's a lot of times I lose people, and I'm like, if they're below the gun, I lose people, and I just really like running an optic on it. So give that a try. It's better than you think.
Watch the sky.
Oh, sir.
Remaining operators from that squad. Hunt them down.
Wait, there's one close.
We've located the rest of them.
Oh, I love sliding! So moving on to the Hurricane, very underrated gun, has great mobility and very easy to use. I do run the FSS Sharkfin. This is one that helps aiming, idle stability, and has no cons, but when we tune it, we get some kind of extra benefits out of it, like its aim walking speed. Again, running hollow point, definitely tune that to damage range and get some extra recoil control out of it. Phantom grip helps a lot with that sprint to fire time, recoil and sprint to fire. Demo Quicksilver, again, same idea, sprint speed, strafing speed, helps with all that stuff. Aim walking speed, aim down sight speed for that one. And then again, that laser that is not going to be visible, but helps our ADS. PDSW is another gun that has a ton ton of mobility, very good strafe speeds, but the iron sights and recoil control are a little wonky. Now you do have to run this GR33 light rail to get a lot more boost in your movement speed. Here's the tunings for that. However, one thing you can do is you can run this integrated reflex. The stats aren't as good movement wise, but it does give you a like red dot that's integrated in it, but it's kind of like a really small sight box. I do like to run the FTAC Castle compensator in this one because the recoil is just too much without it. But because of that aim down sight speed being so slow, I will tune it towards ADS for this one. Again, 1 milliwatt quick laser help with that ADS because again, it does struggle a little bit in that department. Bruin Q900 grip, Sprintifire ADS, same idea. And then lastly, that hollow extended stock really helps that aim walking speed or that strafe speed. So the last 3 guns, these are going to be more the sniper supports. Great option if you're not a super aggressive player for sniper support on Resurgence, or very, very good on Al Mazrah if you like sniping. Kastov 70 for you, 45 round mag, True Attack grip is going to help that Sprintifire and ADS. Very important. You really need that. Ultra that stock again helps that strafing speed and sprint speed. I do like to run an optic on the 70 for you. The iron sights aren't bad by any means, but I do kind of prefer it. If you aren't going to run an optic, a lot of options here. You could go with one of the movement barrels for that make up some of that movement speed. You could of course put on hollow point, which would be better for like kind of close range stuff. Now this is one where I kind of go back and forth. Do you run the Schlager Peck box or do you run something like the FSS OLAV laser? If you're going to be aggressive, might want to put on the FSS OLAV, but if you're going to be a little bit more passive, stick with the Schlager so it's not visible, and then there's the tuning on that one. Tempus Razorback is also a lot of fun, very fast fire rate. Now you can go 45 or 60 round mag here. Definitely go 45 if you're going to be more aggressive and want to have better movement speeds, but 60 gives you a lot of damage per mag for sure. This gun has a little bit of wobbly recoil, so I do like to run the Edge 47 for the underbarrel, but you could swap this for a compensator instead as well. Again, with that whole Sprintifire idea, I am running the FSS OLAV on this one so we can make up for that Sprintifire time. The FLT 22 again helps Sprintifire and ADS. Very important on these if we're going to run it as a close range gun. And then I am running an optic on this run, Cronin Mini Pro. The iron sights aren't too bad on the Tempest, so you could definitely take this off and use another attachment instead if you want to. And then lastly, the Chimera, another solid sniper support option. Definitely need that 45 round mag. Doesn't have the best damage for mag. Bruin Flash Grip is going to be again that one that helps with Sprintifire and aimed on sight speed time. The Ravage 10 stock is going to help some of our mobility a little bit out. I am running an optic here. The iron sights aren't too bad, so you definitely don't have to use that. If you don't use that, maybe put on something like hollow point or put on an underbarrel for some recoil control. If you want this to have better range and recoil control, put on like the big 10-inch barrel, but this really slows the gun down, so just be wary if you do that. Lastly, we need that faster Sprintifire time, so I am going to run the VOK laser on this one. All right, guys, that is going to wrap things up. If you need to know the long range meta, I will link that video here. The only thing I will say about that video is the TAC V did get a nerf after that video, so the TAC V kind of knocked that down a few slots. Also did my best loadout video not too long ago. If you want to check that out. If you're new here, consider subscribing for more content like this. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.